Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true and open debate they've been looking for. The dust has still not settled with the deal between the government of the Bahamas and Oban Energies for the construction of a $4 billion oil refinery and $1.5 billion liquid bulk facility in East End, Grand Bahama. Now, several weeks ago, the deal was sealed between both entities and it set the opposition and airways ablaze with a whole lot of questions on queries on would-be irregularities. The louder the public gets with the questions, the softer the government gets with its answers to those questions. Whispers in the wind say the Prime Minister will address all concerns soon, but for now, mum is the word, as On the Record continues to probe to find the best answers to those questions. Our topic this week is Oban Energy's deal, cloudy or clear? Well, we're going to explore that topic with Gowan Bowe, he's an accountant and CFO of Fidelity Bank, and Kazarina McKinney-Lambert, environmentalist and executive director of the Bahamas Reef Environmental Educational Foundation. It's all On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We're back right after this.
Wait, that's Omar Little from The Wire.
You think everyone is Omar from The Wire?
Wow, it's really nice to meet a fan.
It's like he's right here.
Am I telling you he's being all type shows and stuff?
And you know, Rev Go Play plays a lot of good movies and TV shows.
Excuse me, can't you see we're watching something else? Rude.
Settle all your pop culture disputes with Rev Go Play. Watch, record, and stream all your favorite shows wherever you are. Free for all Rev TV subscribers. Rev, you and us together.
Is your loved one celebrating a birthday? Or maybe they're commemorating a special occasion and you don't know what to get them? Why not get them something custom made from Executive Printers? At Executive Printers, you can create personalized calendars, greeting cards, and even playing cards just for them. A one-of-a-kind gift. They can even do personalized cups, mugs, keychains, coasters, and notepads. So come in and place an order today. We are located on Jerome Avenue South, or log on to epbahamas.com for more info.
Welcome back to On the Record. Our guest for the evening, Gowan Bowe, the CFO of Fidelity Bank, also the president of BICA, which is the Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants. Sir, welcome. As always good to have you here, as well as Kazarina McKinney-Lambert. She's the executive director of Brief. Once again, we invited a member of the Free National Movement, or a representative of the Free National Movement, to join us on this show, but again, no show, so hopefully at some point we will have a representative from the FNM to address this topic. We did have someone from the Progressive Liberal Party on last week. Someone had returned again this week, but could not stay for the duration of the show. All that being said, our topic tonight is Oban Energy's deal, cloudy or clear. Welcome to On the Record. On the surface, and I started, the show last week. This is the second in a series of shows that we have done on this deal because it's so very important. It's created such a buzz and such a controversy that we thought it important to come back, and glad to have you folks here from a different perspective. Although it's a political show, we do like to bring in other experts from time to time to be able to address the issue. So $5.5 billion oil refinery for East Grand Bahama, an area that's been dead for a long time. You're talking about the creation of direct and indirect jobs in the construction phase, as well as beyond that in the operational phase. You're talking about some projections that, according to the information that we've read, to improve the GDP on the island and improve the unemployment figures. On the surface, seems like a good deal.
I believe that we've always, or in more recent times, become accustomed to what I would call the pamphlet details. This is the brochure, and I think we need to start being very meticulous around what are the underlying facts, circumstances, assumptions, and realities. When you look at a number of saying $5 billion, of course it sounds sexy. But when you start breaking it down, then in reality, how is it going to contribute to GDP? So let's be very specific. Is it going to have the construction elements that they speak about? Okay, that's for a period of time. But what are going to be the ongoing economic contributors? And when you talk about the number of jobs, yes, for an island that has suffered severe depression for a long period of time, you know, hundreds of jobs sounds like a large number, but when you're talking about the total unemployed statistic in the country, is this making what I would call a percentage point drop in our overall unemployment in the country? So I don't say that to be critical and to say that all that glitters is not gold. I say that to say, well, let's get beyond the pamphlet. Let's start looking at all of the very specific factors so that we have benchmarks and milestones to judge it by. I think we get too caught up in what are the headline details on the surface and not say, well, these are the 20 elements that have to be judged over time. And I know we'll talk a little bit about it in the show, but right down to the environmental cost of saying, forget, let me not say forget, putting aside the actual degradation of the environment, think about the cost of restoring it. So let's put it into economic terms. That, you know, if you say that the damage that potentially can happen can even be $1 billion that will be to the project, is that going to remain viable after that? So I think that we need to sober in our analysis and say, well, let's look at all facts and circumstances. Let's not jump to conclusions one way or the other. And if it is a fantastic deal, you should be able to articulate it in a manner that all people can understand.
In an instance like this, when you're talking, even in the construction phase, when you're talking about a facility like this, a project like this, immediately what comes to mind is the ancillary businesses that can happen and flourish as a result of this. When you're talking about construction, there's housing, there are meals, there are all kinds of things, transportation, there are other possible benefits. Again, these weren't the things that I think were articulated up front.
But if you put those into the context of saying, well, what is that spend?
Right.
So when you start talking about the facility and all of it, we've heard it and we've seen it on many projects where the dollar amount quoted is the build-out value over, you know, a very long period of time. And then when you start saying, well, what is the actual economic contribution on an annual basis? It is not to dismiss that there will be none. But if you think about the specialist skills, you think about the nature of materials, etc., a large part of that contribution is actually going to exit the country by virtue of importing the materials that are going to be needed. So it is saying, well, what is it that's going to be what I would call the residual and sustainable economic impact in the country? And we don't have to be talking in what I would call hypothetical terms. We can literally, so the things you mentioned in terms of the employment and what is expected to be the employment, the knock-on industries that are expected to be created and then sustained. We don't want it just for the build-out period of it. The skill sets that may be learned from it in terms of educating persons, building engineers, technicians, and the like. So these are elements that should be very clearly set out, because those should be the bases upon which the Bahamas Investment Authority and the wider Bahamian public should be evaluating this deal.
And at the same time, I think it's very important that we evaluate the potential costs of this deal, particularly recognizing that the east end of Grand Bahama is maybe challenged economically, but it is certainly not a dead area when it comes to the environment. So this is a very vibrant area.
Pause just for a second, but I'm glad you brought that up, but before we got into all of that, what should have happened from an environmental impact perspective? The minute you hear oil refinery, you think you think disaster. I just always think of Exxon Valdez and all these kinds of disasters that would have happened in and around the refining and movement of oil.
Yeah.
So immediately on the surface, you think, but what should have happened from an environmental impact assessment
Well,
standpoint?
it's worth pointing out that refining oil is a massively polluting industry. There's a very good reason why there haven't been any new oil refineries built in the US since the 1970s. And the ones that are in existence are in a very confined area. You won't find an oil refinery in Florida, for example. This is a highly polluting industry that requires a very, very deep review of the environmental impacts. And the environmental impact assessment should be done before a heads of agreement is signed. This is something that should be a contributing factor for us in the Bahamas to decide whether this is the type of development that is best for that island and for our nation. So it should be one of the contributing factors. We're not getting much information, detailed information, as you mentioned, about what the project will entail, but the issue of the clause supposedly in the heads of agreement that says that we cannot back out if the environmental review determines that actually this is not a path that we want to go. That's very worrying to us, certainly.
And why is East End Grand Bahama, as you alluded to, really not the ideal place? Not that there really is an ideal place for an environmental, disaster, but really, why would you say that East End Grand Bahama would not be the most ideal place for this?
It's an incredibly valuable area for our environment and for the industry that sustains. We're talking about fisheries, we're talking about tourism. There are a number of national parks in that area, including the Lucayan National Park, which is the most visited national park in the Bahamas. And these are at risk if this kind of industry is put in that area. The east end of Grand Bahama is home to a number of mangrove creeks, tidal areas that are nursery habitats for fish species, for crawfish species that are benefiting Bahamians throughout the country. It's a hub for tourism, and it's also very important when it comes to carbon sequestration, so the locking down of carbon in our atmosphere that is helping protect us from climate change.
So I'm going to take this now from an economic perspective. And, it sounds really wonderful. I think I visited East End one time in my life, and a beautiful time. But, you hear the national parks and you hear about, what it's doing for tourism, but you look at the overall economy of Grand Bahama and then you say, well, how much is this contributing to the economy? You have all this wonderful stuff there, but, Grand Bahama's economy is still in the slump. So my question is, you say that this great preserve there and these parks, etc., and they're great for tourism, but economically, is it enough? Or I can say it's not sustaining the economy of the country. So how do you now balance that? I mean, if I'm a Grand Bahamian?
And that's the element that I say we don't have a proper, what I would call, national development plan articulated for what I would call the country and the elements of the country. Because not every island has the same environmental significance, same economic significance, if you will, same natural resources. And so we should be looking, and we say on Grand Bahama, personally I've always long held the view that Grand Bahama is not a touristic destination. And maybe that's jaded by the fact of looking at Freeport. Because East End is one of those that when you think about Exumas, Cat Island, the Abacos, that East Grand Bahama, if you go out, I was fortunate enough just to be there 2 weeks ago, that, when you look at the waters and the beautiful environment that is there, then when you start thinking about boutique hotels, ecotourism and the likes, then have we exploited that for Grand Bahama and East Grand Bahama? And when we look at the western end of Grand Bahama and thinking about Freeport, that's the industrial hub. So from an economic standpoint, my question would be, are we willing to sacrifice any and all today for what could be a long-term sustainable venture if we started maximizing what we have in natural resources? Grand Bahama has suffered from what I would call the Freeport syndrome, in that the focus has always been around the free trade area, the Port Authority and the regulatory function and governmental challenges that have taken place. And sometimes we forget about the rest of Grand Bahama and how we take advantage of it. I think economically, when we stop, and Casuarina mentioned this, well, what's the cost of the project? And I look at the clause in terms of saying, well, regardless of the results of the environmental impact assessment, you can't change it. Well, that's from an environmental standpoint, but economically, if the assessment says that this is the cost to restore it, and I went back to that earlier point, and it now becomes $1 billion, any heads of agreement that is financially not viable, that cannot be funded, that is going to be a burden onto the government where the concessions and other elements going into it can be broken because you have not satisfied the ability to demonstrate that this is an economically viable project. And I think that whilst they may not have used that escape mechanism, that certainly exists where we should be saying in Grand Bahama, how do we turn around the economy of Grand Bahama, but not looking at it in isolation? How do we turn around the economy of the Bahamas, and how do we make sure that every island and its actual contributions are mapped out so we have a strategic plan, not a haphazard reaction to any and every investor that comes in?
Is there any scenario where a oil refinery can work in Grand Bahama?
In my mind, no.
Why not?
I think the environmental cost is too great. I think we do need to think about the fact that we're not properly accounting for the ecosystem services that our environment is providing. Brief has been working with the Nature Conservancy and the Bahamas National Trust, and we recently came out with a report, an economic valuation of ecosystem services within our network of marine protected areas. We hired a fantastic organization called the Natural Capital Project to do an evaluation of our protected areas, our marine protected areas throughout the country, and identified $6 billion of ecosystem services that come out of these protected areas every year. So while historically we have not been well documenting this value, I think it's really important to put that into consideration. It's also worth looking at other examples of oil refineries, and there's certainly
There's
a case.
one right in Grand Bahama.
Storage.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big distinction.
Yeah.
Storage and mixing and transshipment is very different from actually refining oil. And I think that's a point that maybe hasn't really been picked up on. But this is something that is a completely different scale and a different project than we already have going on.
What should be the role of a Bahamas National Trust, a Brief, even a Save the Bays? All these groups have come out publicly in opposition to this. What should be the ideal scenario for you all in a project like this? Because if the government has proceeded with this heads of agreement and now you're coming and saying we're opposed, it seems the horse is out of the gate.
Yes, it does seem that way. We had high expectations of a consultative process for these types of developments, and ideally before a heads of agreement is signed, and getting input from our experts. We have a great body of experts in the Bahamas working at the National Trust, working at Brief, working in other areas that can provide input and guidance. And that didn't happen in this situation. And there should be a component of public consultation that goes into the environmental impact assessment. And we haven't seen that happen yet.
Interesting. Folks, we are at the point of our first break in the show. When we come back, we're going to continue this discussion. We're looking at the Oban deal in Grand Bahama. Stay with us. We're back right after this.
This segment is sponsored by Percy's Island Game.
We're gonna give you a check every week for a year! Percy's Pension Plan, Island Game.
Bro, you hear about Percy's Pension Plan?
Yeah, something about $1,000 a week for a year.
That's Percy's Pension Plan. You could win one of 5. All you gotta do is put $20 on your Island Game account, and you have a chance to win up to 52 times.
You know something, guys? I can need one of those Percy's Pension Planning, because with Island Game, it's surely a guarantee.
Game, keep you winning, Percy's Pension Plan.
Oi, I ain't got no tension, I got Percy's pension.
Counting right this easy train at Percy's Island Game.
Oh man, this is all going again. Don't worry about that, boss. You know we need to go. Do it center. The Do It Center? Let's go, man. I need to get on there.
Hi, welcome to Do It Center.
Believe it or not, USA prices are right here in Grand Bahama. Do It Center has everything you need for the contractor, homeowner, and do-it-yourselfer. Save money at Do It Center in the Gold Rock Complex and give them a call today at 351-DO-IT.
Oh, I see you found it.
That's right.
Welcome back to On the Record tonight. We're discussing Oban Energy's deal, cloudy or clear. My guests tonight, Kazarina McKinney-Lambert and Gawain Bowe. As we went into that break, we were really talking about looking at the environmental impact of this and the possibilities. But the question that keeps coming to my mind is, what would have prompted government to sign off on this so quickly without the consultative processes, without the EIAs, the environmental impact assessments, without all of the things that normally go or precede the signing of something like this? What would have prompted such a hasty move?
Well, I think you give a lot of credit in terms of saying what all used to happen before, because a lot of times I think the first time you hear about a number of projects is at the signing of some form of document.
That is true.
And I believe that the difference between what I would call 2018, but certainly several years back, and going back into the 80s and 90s is information. That in the past, it was not as easy to glean information, and so there was a greater challenge in terms of disseminating. Nowadays, you know, it literally can go onto a web page or
Google,
anywhere, and that is the first thing that happened probably when this heads of agreement was signed, that all of the headlines didn't come about because of Interpol. They came about because persons simply, journalists and others, Google the characters and Google the entities. But when we stop and say, well, what should go into it, it is understanding and not being afraid to admit where there is a need to strengthen our, what I would call, economic planning function. That if we look at this and say that there will be all types of projects that come about, and you won't employ all of the necessary talents to evaluate each and every one because they're not consistent and you don't have endless resources to have endless people on the payroll. But I think when you have something of this magnitude in dollar terms, something of this magnitude in terms of size and scale and the use of land, the use of our seawall and the sea waters, that it is important that we start bringing our best and brightest people to the fore to say, let's sit down and go through this in a very detailed and comprehensive manner. I will step back and say, when I think about it from the government, I clearly believe there is a need to separate church and state, and I'm going to use church as being everything else and state, in that the government has to make the ultimate decision. But that decision should be based on the input of all those that have something to contribute that is worthwhile. It should hear the environmental concerns, and then, if you will, look to how those can either be mitigated, allayed, or addressed. It should be hearing the economic factors that should be considered, and then having persons that can sit behind and say, well, yes, in our vernacular, mouth can say anything. Money buys land. Let's see whether these are things that have actually been achieved in other projects of a similar nature in other countries, etc. We should then be sitting back and saying, I'm thinking about the macroeconomic factors, so my unemployment, the economic activity in the island, etc. And then I make a decision once all of that information is there, but I can then articulate, these were the concerns that were raised, this is how we address them. There will be some that will not address to the satisfaction of everyone, but I have at least, if you will, washed my hands to an extent that says, I have done the best for the country that I believe I could have done. And I believe that we are very dismissive about the National Development Plan. And I'm very passionate about it because I believe that as a country with so much opportunity, so much good fortune, and we have, purely by the grace of God, gotten to where we are, that if we stopped and planned out our economic and our social future, I believe that we could be so much further ahead. And by doing that would allow us to say that there is a plan that people can now buy into that will allow us to build euphoria as things happen, not immediately, but over time, and then we don't get into this belief that we need a mega project to, if you will, quell everyone's concerns over economic uncertainty.
The reason I asked that as well is because politically, Grand Bahama would have delivered 5 seats to this administration. There was tremendous pressure to bring some kind of relief to the people of Grand Bahama. There was the deal with the Lucayan Resort that was in doubt for a while, and then this happened. From where you sit, is this one of those situations where it was almost a knee-jerk to the heavy demands that are still being placed on government to produce results?
I think there's no question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I completely understand that. You know, I mean, Grand Bahama is in a very difficult situation with the unemployment level there, and that's something that we really need to address very seriously. But we need to address it in the context of a national development plan and think about sustainable development for the country. And by sustainable development, I'm meaning development that meets the needs of the current generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. That's from the Brundtland, that's the Brundtland definition of sustainable development. And we need to be thinking about that throughout what we're doing. And developing in a way that, that does fit into a national plan rather than is a knee-jerk reaction to a critical need in that island.
How do you have this discussion with the fella or the young lady in Grand Bahama who hasn't worked in 10 years, who is barely surviving, watching family, friends, colleagues leave the island in search of, I mean, just in a very, I'm sure all of you have been to Grand Bahama. From the moment you arrive there, you can feel, you know, the economic depression. You can see it at every turn. What do you say to these people that, okay, we're having this cushy discussion here in Nassau, but my reality is so very different here on the ground?
I think when you speak to that person, though, it is saying, do you want to have a paycheck tomorrow and cancer in 5 years? Do you want to have the plot of land that you now are used to having a picnic on no longer available to you because it has been soiled by some environmental disaster where you can't go back and have those memories? And it isn't about being insensitive to her financial needs. It is around saying, well, what we need to do is methodically work towards ensuring that when you start working, this is for the long term. This is not a temporary job that when the contract ends in 3 months, you will no longer have anything else to do. We are looking at how do we take this massive piece of land and how do we turn this into an economic engine? How do we embrace you in that process in terms of saying your knowledge and understanding of what's taking place in the island? You know, when you go into Grand Bahama, you do see what I would say the two sides of the coin, because you do see some ventures that are able to sustain and still based
and
on
some of them
the
tourism based too. Yeah,
still
doing very
taking
well.
place. And the question really becomes, what is stagnating Grand Bahama? And I think when you go back time and time again, it comes to this loggerhead between a quasi-government and government. And we have to really say that ultimately government has to make some very bold and probably unpopular decisions in the short term in order to have a long-term future for Grand Bahama.
And also thinking about and digging a little bit deeper into the type of jobs that we're talking about. Certainly from examples elsewhere, oil refining is a very, very dangerous industry, particularly for the employees and for people living in neighboring communities. We see this all the time in the oil refineries in the Gulf of Mexico in the US. It's by nature a very dangerous industry. And this is in a country where they do have very stringent regulations, OSHA, the occupational health and safety standards there. And you still have have damaging impacts to human life.
You spoke to a particular situation in a particular Caribbean country while when we were in the break. Yeah, and what would have the amount paid out as a result of the damage?
Well, this was the situation. There was an oil refinery on the island of St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It was called Hovensa, and it was fined for breaches of the Clean Air Act. This is air pollution that was impacting neighboring communities as well as workers at the facility. They were fined over $5 million and also required to spend $700 million in remediation. So cleaning up the impacts that were caused. So when you referenced $1 billion earlier, that's kind of what we're talking about. That oil refinery, that was in 2011. So you're looking at 2011 dollars. And that oil refinery closed in 2012 without implementing those cleanup mechanisms that were instructed by the EPA. And it's worth pointing out that the U.S. does have strict environmental legislation. They have the EPA, they have the Clean Air Act. We don't have that kind of legislation in the Bahamas at this point.
Well, interesting. Folks, we're at the halfway mark in our show. We've got lots more to cover. Our topic this evening is Oban Energy's deal, cloudy or clear? And our guests are here. We're having a fantastic discussion. Join us on the other side of the break for much more on The Record.
Every day, people suffer from some sort of joint pain.
To put on my socks, to bend over, to put on, I used to have, it was really pain. I don't have it anymore.
If you've been living in pain and you're tired of trying products that just don't work, you are not alone. Today, 1.5 billion people worldwide are living in chronic pain. Don't let pain deny you the life you deserve. Join hundreds of thousands of Omega XL users that have chosen to fight inflammation and get rid of pain. Now they're living a pain-free life to the fullest thanks to Omega XL, the all-natural anti-inflammatory that has more available omega-3s than regular fish oil. Get more benefits in a powerful gel capsule that is smaller, easier to swallow, and more convenient. Switch to Omega XL and experience results you can feel. Put an end to your pain with Omega XL. Visit your local pharmacy or health food stores and get your Omega XL today.
It's a wealth of entertainment with a touch of class and sophistication. A journey of the senses with an unparalleled sense of style. Discover hidden adventures that are cradled in the palms of paradise. Traverse the annals of human history and explore the farthest reaches of exclusivity. It's an excursion that few can afford, but all should experience. And it's only on AWE.
Welcome to the second portion of tonight's show. Our topic is Oban Energy's deal, cloudy or clear. We continue our discussions with Gowan Bowe and Kazarina McKinney-Lambert. One of the key issues in all of this really has been the potential economic impact. Your group, Brief, was one of the first to come out, from what I was seeing, to stand against it. Save the Bays, and more recently the Bahamas National Trust, which says that cannot envisage any scenario where it would support this project. Proposed operation would place it too close to 3 national parks, says that they were kept in the dark about the deal and they're asking now to see the full heads of agreement. When a project like this is now being met with so much resistance from the environmental side of things, how do you see the outcome? What is the possible outcome of all of this? Would you take nothing less than the whole deal is scrapped?
Well, and I think I can start by saying that it's not just these entities that are coming out with major concerns about the project. There is a groundswell of people who are saying that this really, really cannot go forward. It's not in the best long-term interest of our country. It is not in the best interest of our country from a reputational perspective. We certainly feel the country should be known as the country that's powered by the sun. Clean, green, and pristine are the sort of taglines that the country's using, and these are damaging from not just the environmental perspective, but they're damaging our reputation, and that hurts our economy. I think that this needs to be completely revisited. I don't think that we should be going forward with this project, certainly given the information that we have now, and that's our position on this.
We have seen instances where the environmental concerns have led to governments backing off from projects. I remember in the 90s it was the long line fishing that started. I remember the protracted demonstrations over the Clifton Heritage. There was a deal one time, I think, for some Chinese fishing or something somewhere, that was eventually abandoned, the LNG project. So we have seen the might in the past of these environmental groups. Do you foresee something like that happening again?
I think it's really important, sorry to jump in, I think it's really important to not just come out and say no, 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 no. But to say, here's a better option, and this is why it's a better option. And I think one example that I can draw on is the case of Eleuthera, where there is a proposed development for a very precious area, and there has been several proposed developments, a very precious area called Lighthouse Point.
Right, I was reading about that last night, actually.
Okay, great. And I was one of the founding members of the One Eleuthera Foundation. And really, instead of coming out and just saying, no, do not allow this, and the original proposal was for a mega resort with a golf course and a marina, saying, do not allow this development, it's terrible, and leaving it there. Instead, coming forward and saying, here's an alternative. We've put together this incredible document called the Shared Vision for South Eleuthera that says, here's another way of using this really special piece of land that's going to have much stronger benefits from a social perspective for South Eleuthera. The jobs are going to be much more meaningful than they might otherwise be, and more stable, and also from an economic perspective and also from an environment perspective. So to be able to come forward with alternatives and say, look, this land could be used in these other ways, and building support for that, I think, is a way that we should be going.
And I would say, we have the proverb, where there is no vision, the people perish. And I believe that the difficulty that you find taking place with all of those projects there was, if you will, an announcement and a hope that it just went through, as opposed to saying, well, this is what my strategic plan is. This is what I see for the country, for this island, for this development, for this particular project. And these are the aspects that I am now prepared to take, if you will, the town planning or the town meeting approach to say, understand, and then make a decision. That each and every time there are going to be choices where a government or any business entity is going to make a choice that will not be the most environmentally sound decision, in the sense that if you had, if you will, the resources that were not constricting you, like you didn't have to worry about economic activity, you didn't have to worry about financial resources. And so there are going to be what I would call times when environment will win out, because you are seeing the economic impact, you're seeing the benefits of doing something alternative, and there are going to be times when you don't see another avenue and you're saying that this is how I'm trying to make it as palatable as possible. And I think that we've reached the point where we should be mature enough to sit down and understand. Like I said, this shoot first and ask forgiveness later approach is no longer acceptable, because people have a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of information at their fingertips. And so we have to, as governments and leaders, be mature enough to sit down and say that I have an actual plan. It is not a fly-by-night. Someone didn't drop a document on my desk and I said, oh, this sounds good, and then I proceeded. I received the proposal, or I received an inquiry. I went to my persons that I have, my technical professionals in-house, and I've said to them, please flush this out for me. They in turn have gone to their networks and said these are the factors that are there, so that when the decision comes to cabinet or it comes back to the fore, it is more, okay, this is the informed decision. So now when I get into the public arena, I'm not announcing and then being taken by surprise that there's all of this, if you will, concern or questions and uncertainty. Because I've come at it from an informed
to
position.
answer questions.
Well,
Which I don't know.
It frightens persons when you cannot answer
that I
what
think
will be
is
seen
more
as a
unsettling
basic
to people.
question. That if you say all of the furor that has gone on around it, what has left people most disappointed and most concerned is there hasn't been immediate responses to the questions raised.
I mean, for instance, when you have the Minister of Environment who says, that's under the office of the Prime Minister. They will have to answer, or let them answer. I won't speak out of turn, so to speak. But you are the Minister of the Environment. Who else should be more qualified to answer these questions but you? So okay,
Yep.
Okay, we're in agreement on that. The other question that I have has to do really with the whole issue of foreign investment. Obviously, we are not in a position in this country to continue to grow the economy just domestically. So from that perspective, so you're always looking for the right foreign investment, and I chose that word, right foreign investment. But as a foreign investor, I may be looking at this and look what has happened and maybe thinking twice about whether I want to invest in the Bahamas or move ahead with the project. One, because seemingly there's a government who shoots from the hip first and then seek forgiveness after, using your term, and then you have groups saying, "Oh hell no, this won't happen. We're preserving our land, we're preserving our country, our environment," and so particularly when you may be in the business of a hotel development or some kind of development. You're thinking to yourself, is this really the kind of place I want to come and do business?
Well, we have to, I think, set out our policies, because most foreign investors that are what I call legitimate ones, their constant gripe is there's this moving goalpost or this unknown goalpost, that there are no clear rules and guidelines by which I will formulate a plan behind. So yes, there are going to be investors that are very concerned if there are no environmental laws and regulations, because their own development may be relying upon it. So using your example as a touristic development, there will be others that say, well, there is a clause that requires amendment to the Encouragement Act and all of the others that are going to extend certain concessions and certain tax incentives, etc. But that's bespoke to this particular project. And will I get that? Will I not get that? We had the situation where there was a lot of argument between the political parties when they spoke about the Cable Beach resort development and the Paradise Island resort development, to say that one had a most favored nation clause that basically said you could not give any other investor any more favorable clauses, and there was concern that you may have breached that aspect. But if we are realistic and we're saying we're going out to the world, we should be able to go out to the world with our own pamphlet. So I use that in the negative term in the beginning, but I should have it in the positive sense of saying, this is my land policy. So when you come in, you have no ambiguity as to whether I can sell you land or lease you land. This is our protected area, or these are our protected areas, and you have no ambiguity as to what is going to take place in that one. And this is our tax concession policy, meaning that these are the elements that we have to consider before we even get into what concessions you will have. So there is, if you will, a set criteria. Business will tell you, I don't need to have an answer that I want to hear. I need a definitive answer, because I can make a decision and I have
based on the answer. You want to
And I think it's also important to bear in mind that we should look very, very carefully at and be very clear that if something's not allowed in your home country, we shouldn't, people shouldn't be coming to this country thinking that it will be allowed here. And I think that's a major concern with a lot of different types of developments, when it comes to clearing mangroves. If you're in your home country, are not allowed to clear huge swaths of mangrove ecosystems, then don't come to the Bahamas thinking that you can do that here. And I think the point about other foreign investment in areas that may be very concerned right now, saying, well, actually, you know, I want to invest in a eco resort, but I certainly don't want to do that near a place where there's an oil refinery. So we need to be cognizant of those types of developments. And the reality is that a lot of the eco-tourism destined or resorts in the country are much more economically sustainable than some of these big pie-in-the-sky ideas. And they've proven time and time again, okay, small is beautiful. We don't necessarily need to have mega anchor projects that are most likely to fail. We should be putting our energy into smaller, more sustainable, economically and environmentally
And that is so true again. You know, I always say these are the things that we don't talk about enough. We don't promote enough. But we are at the point of our final break. We've got one more segment. Stay with us. Our discussion continues right after this.
We're gonna give you a check every week for a year. Percy's Pension Plan, Island Game.
Bro, you hear about Percy's pension plan?
Yeah, something about $1,000 a week for a year.
That's Percy's pension plan. You could win one of 5. All you gotta do is put $20 on your Island Game account, and you have a chance to win up to 52 times.
You know something, guys? I can need one of those Percy's pension plan, you know, because with Island Game, it's surely a guarantee.
Percy's Pension Plan. Dream big, we will help you live it. Percy's Pension Plan. Island Game, we got you. Percy's Pension Plan. From the friends you can trust. If winning is a must, don't play the game you know.
Hey, I ain't got no tension. I got Percy's pension.
Count and ride this easy train at Percy's Island Game.
One America News Network, your leading source for the latest breaking national and international news. With nearly 4 times as many headlines as the other networks. Straight news, no speculation, no opinion, just the facts. Complete coverage 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. One America News Network, your source for credible news.
Hi, I'm Davriel, and welcome to Rev Tips, where we answer your most important Rev service questions. Today's questions are all about RevGo Play, the new TV Everywhere app from Rev. How many devices can I use RevGo Play on per Rev TV account? You can use up to 3 devices on RevGo Play per Rev TV account, and you can stream live 2 devices simultaneously. How do I record my favorite shows on RevGo Play? Simply select your favorite show, select record, and choose between current or series recording. How many NDV hours do I have, and when do they expire? You can record up to 20 hours of content using your RevGo Play NDVR. Your recorded content will remain in your storage folder for up to 30 days. How do I activate Catch Up TV or Start Over? If you've just tuned into your favorite show but want to start from the beginning, simply select Restart. If you have more questions about RevGo Play, feel free to visit the RevGo Play page on cablebahamas.com or call our support team at 601-2200.
Welcome back. This is our final segment of this episode. We've been discussing the topic Oban Energy's deal, cloudy or clear, with my guests Gawain Bowe and Katharina McKinney-Lambert. Katharina, I'm going to start with you for this segment. What is your expectation of a government in a project like this, when there is the potential for something to come in that can spur some economic development, that can employ people, that can bring some relief to an island like a Grand Bahama? But you know, there's always the question of how does it fit into the environment? What is your overall expectation?
My expectation is that it will be viewed and reviewed in the context of our National Development Plan. That is something that has been worked on by successive administrations, that there's been a lot of consultation and buy-in to get to where we are with the National Development Plan, and that this should be a document that is used to evaluate possible developments. I think there needs to be consultation. I think there needs to be, our government needs to draw on experts in the field and dig deeper into this kind of proposal before a heads of agreement is signed. I also think we need to think about other commitments that we have made, particularly when it comes to fossil fuels and our stated objective of moving away from fossil fuels and moving towards renewable energy sources. This seems hugely contradictory to that and somewhat hypocritical, given that we are making a case in the international arena that we are very vulnerable to climate change, particularly to sea level rise, increased storm intensity, and we're telling other countries, hang on, your polluting industries are negatively impacting our country, and meanwhile we are moving forward with what seems to be a very heavy fossil fuel agenda.
Well, you know, like I said during the break, if you don't believe in climate change, you need only drive along West Bay Street for the past 2 weeks and you would see what is happening. Gowan, the other part to this really is entrenched in politics. You have an opposition that's screaming bloody murder on the other side. The governing party saying, hey, wait a minute, this deal was approved in principle when you were in government. And now it's become a political football. I mean, I said it last week, and I've seen it. It's emboldened the opposition in many ways. How do we avoid this becoming such a political issue where the opposition is now agitating and lining up and saying, no, it cannot go, and the government is stenching and saying, well, you're not going to tell us what to do, we're in power, we have the significant majority, and it is steadily headed down that path?
I think the amusing element of politics is,
and there are many amusing elements.
Yes, going to say that your views change depending on which side of the aisle you sit.
Always,
right? And the way we cut through that is really what the Westminster system and our actual system of government should be. That the technical persons in the ministries should be the ones responsible for the execution of strategy. That politicians don't become all-knowing just because they have been elected and appointed to ministerial posts. There needs to be the maturity that says, what my purpose as an elected official is that I set the strategy for the country in my political party caucus. I have a philosophy, I have a vision, and this is what I want to achieve over my time in office. But I should be relying on the persons within my ministries and departments who should be skilled, should be qualified, should be secure in tenure, in the sense that not worrying about contradicting or opposing if they have good advice to give, and relying on them to demonstrate that this is the way you go about executing. That when I start talking about a project, you can bring an investor, Mr. Minister, but allow me to go through the process. And when I give it back to you, yes, I respect that your cabinet has the ultimate decision, but respect that my technical expertise at the permanent secretary level, at the technocrat level, is one that should be relied upon. And then the political football falls away because both political parties, when in power, would have been relying on the same technical resources. But that then also allows you to look at what may be the shortcomings in those technical resources. If I say I don't have a properly staffed and functioning economic planning unit, if I don't have the right skilled economists, environmentalists, attorneys, accountants, those factors, then I look at how do I strengthen that civil service to really become the engine that drives the whole organ of government. That we too often see the power being reposed in the minister. And like I said, the minister may not come from even that technical background.
The minister's not always the most well-informed.
And if you look at the most successful leaders, CEOs, prime ministers, presidents, they were the ones who surrounded themselves by the brightest of persons who were more in the permanent role. You know, I see a prime minister and a cabinet as being, if you will, the ones that have to sign contracts because they only have a specific tenure, right? And it is designed that way so that if their vision and strategy is not achieving the end goal, so in a business where there's profitability, in government, economic prosperity and social justice, then you have an ability to change them. But you do need a foundation of knowledge and people that you have to rely upon. And in this whole ordeal, not to play on Oban, but it has always gone back to what I would call the politicians. And really, the politicians should be confident enough to say, if this was one recommended by the technical persons, that within reason, I allow them to sit and explain what went into the process of actually recommending this project or otherwise. Because we're assuming it was recommended.
Okay. So you may have some nays in there as well. So,
and an integral part of that to get to where we need to be with that is to have an active and aware public and a strong environmental education system in our country where children are learning from the ground up what kind of questions to ask. If you're at a town meeting or if you're in this role in government, what kind of questions should be asking, and how can you dig a bit deeper when it comes to understanding the environment and understanding other components that go into it from an economic perspective.
We're just about to wrap up, so I'm going to put this out to both of you. At this juncture, do we apply brakes or we pull up the emergency brake on this project? Which do we do and why?
My view is we apply brakes. And when I say that, I believe that, and I guess in terms of my own professional training, empirical analysis should be the determinant factor. That whenever emotion is involved, you sometimes are either hasty or make decisions that you shouldn't. And when I say empirical, the economic factors are still to be vetted and described. The environmental factors as it relates to what it does to the actual ecosystem, but also economically in terms of the cost of restoration, even if it's possible, and the impact that has on the economic viability. The quality of characters involved are still to be adjudicated in the court of public opinion. And I believe that all of those elements will get you to an answer, because if all is laid on the table, the scales will tip in one direction or the other. And I believe that all persons will be satisfied that everything is now known and we are making a decision based on that. So I'm not going to condemn it. I'm not going to condone it either. I'm saying that I think there's still much more to be written, and I think we need maturity by our leaders to make sure they do that and not be afraid to admit, well, I may have been hasty and this is not the right project, if that's the way the scales turn.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we need to go back to the drawing board with this one. And
So
really,
you say emergency brake?
Yes, I do. Based on what we know so far and based on case studies from elsewhere, I think this really needs to be reassessed from the start. And there's too much at stake. This is something that could have dramatic and permanent impacts on the direction of our country. And it's not a question of slowing down and jumping through the hoops a little bit slower. I think we really need to evaluate from the ground up, is this the direction that we want our country to go?
Folks, thank you very much for coming on and talking with us tonight. This is obviously something that's not going to go away anytime soon, and certainly we are here to flesh out all aspects of it, and thank you for coming on. It's good to have discussions sometimes free of the politician, because you don't have the politics getting into the discussion, and I thank you for bringing that tonight, and I'm sure that our viewers appreciate it. And continue to appreciate those perspectives. So we hope that you've enjoyed tonight's show. Special thanks to Darwin Bowe, Kazarina McKinney Lambert, my producer, technical staff, and of course you, our audience, for watching. Be sure and join us for more On The Record next week. Once again, I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We'll see you next week, same time, same place.